The Imitation Nation podcast covers all things counterfeit, hosted by Shabir and Bersaftar of the Partnership for Safe Medicines and Sven Bergman of Venture Global. All statements are their own and not the opinions of their employers. All right, Imitation Nation podcast. Sven, welcome.
Shabir, thank you. Good seeing you again, and good being here. How are you in this busy time?
It's a busy time. I've actually never had so many different things to do, and also had team members who are having to handle stuff with minimal direction from me. I just work with this. I mean, I work with you, but I work with like a whole team of people who are really, really good at their job. They're professionals, at the top of their game. And so I don't feel uncomfortable, but I appreciate that everybody I work with is handling a full plate of potential and pitfall at the same time. And then I will say that here at home, I'm dealing with a 16-year-old with a mysterious virus, and I'm doing my best not to get it, including bleaching all the doorknobs and railings around the house and banning her from the kitchen.
Yeah, see, that's why I'm right now drinking my little vitamin tablet that I every morning, because so far, knock on wood, this year haven't gotten really sick yet. The flu is apparently the worst it has been in a while. And I'm trying very hard, although I have teenagers. Various viruses have passed through this house. So far, they have been kind and walked by me, or my immune system was able to fight them off. But I'm with you. Well, hang in there, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, the boyfriend's dad got it and gave it to the boyfriend. The boyfriend gave it to my daughter. My daughter gave it to my wife, who came down with her symptoms on day one of her annual Colorado vacation ski trip. So she's on vacation, ill in her room, and probably shaking her fist at our daughter 3 states away.
Well, but at least she has good snow. I think there's really good snow in Colorado right now.
She does. She does have good snow, which she can see from the window from her bed.
And then, by the way, just the last thing for us before we can talk about what we want to talk about, but so for folks that listen, we had a little bit technical issue kind of getting signed on, which is fine. But the funniest thing for me in there was us trying to figure out which channel we're talking about. They're like, I sent you a link. You're like, where? In the chat. Which chat? And Shabir and I recently had this where we're like, so for all the folks on here that listen that are like Gen X, like me, where you had a home phone and that was it. And that was the one way somebody could reach you, right? And now it's it's on LinkedIn and Facebook. Oh no, I sent you a messenger. Oh, it's a text. It's a WhatsApp. And there's like 8 different channels. And then folks were like, did you get my message? And the first, like, where? Like, which channel did I miss?
Even Google's ecosystem, right?
Right.
I could have sent it to you in email. I could have sent it to you in Google Chat, or I could have sent it to you in some sort of durable Google Meet chat conversation. It's ridiculous.
So I think it will be time to simplify again one of these days. I'm waiting for a super app that kind of combines it all back down into one, but we'll see where it goes. Anyways.
So we did last week in our episode, we covered an arrest or an indictment, I should say, of a gentleman in New York City who was accused of using counterfeit and misbranded Botox on patients. And I heard you heard from one of our listeners about that.
I did. Somebody I work with said, I listened to your podcast. Wow, I learned a lot. And then in joke, he's like, listen to your podcast. I'm canceling my RSVP to the Botox party hosted with Dr. Nick. And Dr. Nick is the doctor on the Simpsons. And he's like, man, you're such a party pooper. It was such a deal, though. And he's just laughing. But so the funny thing actually is, like, I've heard from folks that actually other folks as well that in my circle do use Botox. And they're like, wow, that actually was really enlightening to even know that's out there while they go to like a correct doctor, but that it's out there. So it's good.
I once had a person in my friend circle who I love dearly and who is actually a very excellent evidence-based medical professional, right? I love her. I love her brain. And she's very careful about this. She once posted this sort of dramatic story on Facebook to our circle of friends about going to this closed hair salon where there was someone performing Botox. And it was sort of like the same story I would tell when I used to go to underground poker games in Virginia. And except the
Underground
poker
poker
games,
in Virginia.
the
Okay.
poker games were not injecting a substance into my body that I didn't have any supply chain tracing for. And that's what happened to her. And so I talked to her about it. She was like, you know what? That was a bad idea. I don't think I'll do that again. And she didn't, right? Like, but even for medical professionals, the stuff we talk about is still news. And so I'm glad you reached some people I'm glad we reached some people with our
We should
podcast.
be. Yes. Well, let's keep the reaching of people. What are the news stories we found this week that might be interesting to talk about?
So we talked about the fake Birkin bags or the working bags for the Walmart Birkin bags, and then I promised that we would talk about Lululemon this week. And I'll tell you that we're not just talking about Lululemon because of one of my favorite brand protection professionals is a Lululemon lover,
That's
but
awesome.
um, Lululemon has been around a long time. They make a high quality product. People who love Lululemon, and even if you don't love it, things like the Scuba series of fabrics that go into their women's sweatshirts and hoodies are revered in terms of the quality.
Wow.
And so they've been there have been some lookalikes for sale in Costco, and there's a whole ongoing conversation online, especially on Reddit, but everywhere about comparison of these Lululemon lookalikes versus the non-lookalikes, and overall, you'll see people talk about the difference in quality.
I'm
And
sure.
you'll see them talk about how, like, I bought this and it was, yes, it was a lot cheaper, but it's not the same. And the thing that I keep remembering, and the thing that I would think about as a brand professional is that, not all counterfeits are regulated and protected the same way, right?
Yeah.
Like, you get these apparel products, if they don't put the Lululemon logo on it, and they don't copy a bunch of distinctive items, it is not as easy to protect as, let's say, a copy of a medicine, right? Like
Very much so. Very much so.
you and I work heavily in and around counterfeit pharmaceuticals, and there's all of the normal trademark protections, and then there's the fact that the products themselves have a regulatory overlay, which makes it, in many ways, easier to spot a counterfeit because it hasn't been through that process. There's no FDA for hoodies. And so, it's a big difference. But I think that it's really hopeful, and I hope that Lululemon appreciates it, that we're seeing, their customers talking about how these copies are not as good. Yeah, they're cheaper, but you're getting what you pay for. And the
Yeah.
brand loyalty that you see is significant in those conversations.
And the brand loyalty is important. So, as you know, like my firm, we do a lot of in the brand protection space. And so we work with plenty of apparel companies. And so Costco, while obviously an amazing brand, amazing company, for a while was really, really good about buying up excess inventory, right? Which was floating around somewhere. And that was just their strategy. If somebody has excess inventory of something, you buy it, right? Which is fine. And then you sell it at a discount, which is a completely viable strategy. There were a variety of more high-end apparel brands that had a significant issue, from jeans to performance wear, where they had folks dump their last year's supply into Costco's warehouses. And many of the brand protection directors I work with, it was driving them nuts because they're like, it's undermining. It's not illegal. It's not counterfeit. It's not gray market, but it's hurting our brand, right? When you have a hoodie that normally costs whatever, $150, sitting at Costco for $50, right? And
Yeah.
so they many of these brands reinstituted a lot of policies of like, you can't dump inventory and what you need to do. But yeah, if Costco has an opportunity, then to your point, if they're like, fine, if there's something that looks very similar, is high quality, and I don't violate a trademark owner's right, I get why they do it. So it's an interesting one to see those products pop up somewhere.
I think there's also an interesting aspect with this administration that's coming into play here. So for people that don't know, one of the complications of low cost, especially Chinese copies of branded, lovable apparel, is that there is an industry of slavery-driven cotton production in China. And it has been well known. It's the subject of Section 307 of the Tariff Act. And it's not allowed to be imported. Products with slavery cotton, as they call it, are not allowed to be imported into the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it comes in sometimes as smuggled. Basically, they lie on the manifest about what it is or where it's from, or they ship it from a different country. They ship to Argentina and then reship it into the U.S. to hide its label of origin. And all of that has two problems, one of which is it's evading the policies of the U.S. about slavery cotton, which is bad. But two, it's actually evading tariffs, which is a priority for this administration.
Right.
And I think we're going to see, and I'm hoping we actually see some pushback on smuggling. I mean, I'm just going to say it outright. Like, while I don't necessarily have a strong opinion on whether or not tariffs are the right technique to use right now economically, evading tariffs is part of a larger problem of smuggling of things that shouldn't be in the U.S. into the U.S. And that includes counterfeit pharmaceuticals, which I actually care about a lot more than knockoff Lululemon or knockoff Birkin bags.
It's actually funny when you look on LinkedIn. One of my posts last year, just a personal, not amusing, of kind of like what I was thinking were what's going to be happening, trends. I try to post them like weekly, kind of general thoughts of what I see. One of them was about tariffs and counterfeits, and it's exactly that, which is where you have. And again, same as you. I'm not an economist. I have no idea what tariffs will do or won't do. But the one thing I will know is if tariffs jack up the price of a consumer good, the amount of counterfeit will increase. It just does, because folks will look for a cheaper alternative. And then to your point, 80s goods do a lot of things as far as not supporting American allies, obviously evading tariffs themselves, but also using a lot of raw materials that are bad in and of themselves. What you mentioned, one, slave labor, agreed. The other one is anything that is rare earth minerals, precious metals, all of that, conflict diamonds, all of those kind of things, all got included in counterfeit products, which many of them are on various products, banned and regulated, how they are supposed to be mined. In a counterfeit product, they'll put it in. It will be a conflict mineral. It will be a conflict diamond. They'll put it in. They don't care. So I'm with you. I think for folks to more and more understand that, no, a counterfeit is not just, something that's, oh, it's cheaper. Haha, I got a deal. Or, well, fine, the brand doesn't make that much money. No, there's an entire downstream of bad folks, bad action, bad societies profiting from this. So I'm with you.
I know you want to talk about other stuff related to shipping of products into this country, but before we go there, I just want to sort of touch on a couple things, because I know our audience has a lot of brand protection professionals. If you're a brand protection professional and you are starting at a company that's not yet a Lululemon, like there's a bunch of things that you want to be doing, right? Like you want a consultant who's with you, who's doing online purchases, so you can help trace the supply chain of where the lookalikes, knockoffs, and counterfeits are coming from. You want to have all your products trademarked to the extent possible, and you want to have that in the CBP accessible trademark database, right?
Yes.
Because you want the customs
trademark and registered, both things. Yes, and
registry, right? You want all of that to happen, and you want to trademark as much of those products as possible. And then I think that there's something that is not obvious there that you want to do, which is that there are a number of organizations that we know and love that work with the inspectors and do trainings, sometimes right at the port of entries. And I'm thinking primarily of our friends at the International Anti-Counterfeiting Coalition and Chris Buckner's organization. They all have really great relationships. There's regular trainings. I've spoken at one. I wasn't asked back. I hope that's not because I made a bad impression, but
I'm sure it's not.
Many brand owners speak at these events and have exposure and make actual special materials for those inspectors to use, to look at, and also like leave their card with the inspectors. So if you come across something that you see that's suspicious and you're the Lululemon contact for CBP whose card is in their pocket, maybe they'll give you a call and tell you something, useful and help seize a shipment that might have otherwise been let through. So just as a note, if you're a brand protection professional, you're listening to this, these are some of the things that are obvious and then also not obvious. What else have I missed there, Sven?
What companies should do. So 2 second self promo, a lot of that is what my company does, exactly that. We help folks establish a brand protection organization from step one. You just got a brand. What happens now? We actually had a pharmaceutical company out of California one time saying, wow, we just found a counterfeiter we do. And to your point, there's all of these steps. How do you first protect a trademark? Where do you protect it? Where is it registered? A big piece of that is also make sure you have internal SOPs, or standard operating procedure. And what that just means is when you find a counterfeit, you don't run around with your hair on fire like, oh my God, it's a counterfeit. No, if you have a counterfeit, this is what happens, who gets contacted, what are the steps exactly you take. And that's all exactly outlined. So it just becomes a process of how you react. You want to make sure you have good law enforcement connections, especially in your key markets. That is federal and state, to make sure you get proper enforcement. If you become bigger, proper contacts at district attorneys or USA attorney offices to make sure you get those cases prosecuted. And then to your point with the trainings, I think that can't be understated, because when you think about, and you have been to ports before, I've been to ports and mail facilities, right? Those are gigantic facilities. Like I can't stress to people how big they are. Like think about the largest convention center you have ever been to, double it in size. That's an international mail facility. It's just breathtakingly large. Take the largest company you've ever been to their equipment, double it, you have Long Beach as a port, right? So they're massive. So the amount of volume. So yes, for an inspector, the personal touch to understand why these products are bad, what it means, to see it and say, oh, cool, I just got training on this. And to your point, I have a contact I can quickly verify this with, or even better, it's already in CBP's system and I can quickly do this. It does make a difference. The best brands have the best enforcement actions because they do a lot of these trainings. To your point, you can do them alone. That's really hard. There are partners such as ICC, Chamber of Commerce does them as well with their center. So there's folks that do these trainings, and yes, super, super important. And yes, there's a plethora of things companies, then, I always think of it as a Lego set. You start with the foundation and then you build on. Maybe you need an online monitoring, maybe you need an online test purchase program. Maybe you want to hire investigators. Like there's this layering on. And then the last piece, and you talked about it quite a bit with well-established brands, you add a litigation strategy on top of it. You use the Lanham Act or other acts to ensure that if you have a civil course of action, you follow that. So yeah, there's definitely, it can feel very overwhelming for new brands, especially when they find their first counterfeit. So yeah, always reach out to, myself or Shabir, and we can always point you in the right direction. And I love it because it never gets boring. Like there's not a boring day in my life, which I love, but it can be a lot.
Yeah. I love the space of brand protection.
Yes.
It's sort of fun. You get to handle a lot of true crime. And for those who haven't been in law enforcement, and a lot of brand protection people have law enforcement experience, I do not. It's, you get to sort of imagine yourself as playing a game of cops and robbers, which is always, it always feels enjoyable. I have no complaints about that, but I don't have any illusion about actually.
No, and it's great. The last company I was with before I founded my own firm, one of the cases we actually did 10 years ago took a while to work itself through the courts, because the court system, obviously, because there's good due diligence in the United States and due process and blah, blah, blah. But it finally got adjudicated. And then just recently, all of their warehouses were auctioned off. And somebody who I worked with, an investigator, sent me this. He's like, hey, remember them? And I was like, yes. And so you're like, it's also really nice to see justice actually really happen. You're like, the bad guys got jail time, all of their stuff got sold, and so that's great, right? So we had a massive tobacco smuggling ring on the East Coast, took it out, folks got jail time, and all their stuff got auctioned off. And so you're like, that's great that really happened. And so having those wins, it gives you kind of a real versus shuffling paper around. Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's cool. You want to hop into a really nerdy thing I found?
I do, right after I point out, by the way, that I have never been to an international mail facility. So if you're listening to this and you have the ability to make that happen, then just call me. I would love to see the inside of one.
Oh, we got to do that. We actually make it. We're going to make this a either 2025 or 2026 resolution to get you to JFK. All right. So talking of JFK, talking about international mail facilities, talking about small parcels. So, all right, as you know, Shabir, by heart, like I'm like a policy nerd, right? Like I love the minutia of policy. I love reading.
Both of us.
I know you too. And then, on my team, Stacy as well. And it's just, I love it. I know about many people don't. I love it. And then really thinking through, hey, how does this work? And why is this an issue? And how do we address it? Right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about small parcels. So, there's a lot happening right now. You probably see on the federal level, there's many EOs going out as we talked about tariffs. But for me, the interesting piece on that was, and the side effect we have seen is that there seems to be a positive side effect on counterfeit products of one of the EOs. So one of them was that the EO on China tariffs instructed CBP to not accept products with tariffs through de minimis shipments. All right. So let me explain what de minimis is. De minimis is when, as you know, Shabir, I'm from Europe, is when my mom sends me a gift, right, for my birthday. And if that gift is below $800, so it's a person to a person, at that point it's declared de minimis. De minimis means it has limited security risk. It is below a tariff, or it is below a duty level. It gets less scrutiny of inspection. It still can be inspected, but it gets less scrutiny of inspection and normally gets quickly ferried through customs entry. And so small parcels, therefore, have always been kind of a source of counterfeit products, right? It's just something that comes in that was always in the mail. But then 2 years ago, Customs launched a pilot program for a new entry type, which is called Type 86. And what Type 86 is, it basically now allows bulk shipment of de minimis packages. So what does that mean? So you have companies like, Shein or Temu that exploit that loophole and take like 1,000 packages that are de minimis, put them on a pallet, and say they're all de minimis. Type 86 allows them to be cleared the same way. So all of a sudden you have something that should be in the freight environment flow through that de minimis loophole because of Type 86 entry. And so all of a sudden you go like, whoa, now what does that mean in numbers, right? So de minimis has increased in the last year. So de minimis shipments, small parcel shipments, have increased, from 600 million a year, which was already a lot. And that was the last time I was in an IMF, when it was IMF is international facility. That was the last time I was there, and it was 600 million, and that was a lot. Now we get 1.3 billion a year in small parcel shipments through the United States. 1.3 billion.
So you take a small package and you put it together on a pallet with many more of them, and suddenly the pallet's probably worth $150,000, and it's also a great way maybe to hide things that you're smuggling, like counterfeit Ozempic or airbag parts that are counterfeit that when you install them in a car is going to cause the airbag not to fire.
Fentanyl pills, who knows? Lots of stuff. You can, whatever, right? That's exactly it. And so,
as I understand it, these packages, CBP has no idea they're coming. There's no advanced electronic data like with a larger shipment. So they don't even know, like, that one looks suspicious unless when it disgorges from the plane with 100 other thousand packages, it's an issue. So what did the executive order, because you mentioned an EO, say about this?
So what the EO did now, it said de minimis cannot be applied to China, period. So what customs is, they said, great, everything out of China we can't accept. And we can't accept it unless we have full data to know that this is not a good that needs to have tariffs on them. And so for a short while, the shipments really were stopped. Trains were turned around, trucks were turned around, planes weren't allowed cleared to take off and go to the United States, because planes do need to declare a manifest to customs coming in. I have this on the plane, so they do need to declare that before they even take off, and they didn't get clearance to take off. So since then, according to A, news reports, and B, some folks I called, it is moving again, but it is moving A, slower, B, it is moving with advanced data now. So apparently there's a lot of pressure of like, if you want for this to come in, we do need to have all the data. So the loophole still exists. So if right now Shein takes 800 packages of a dress, right, and puts them onto a pallet and clears them through Type 86, but describes in advanced data that these are 800 dresses, that might still clear de minimis through Type 86. There'll need to be a policy fix for that. That's different. But If you don't declare what's in it and you can show what it is and you don't give them the electronic data, your package either now gets additional scrutiny or it doesn't get in or gets rejected to be entry. So it's interesting what's happening there now. We'll see where this goes because stuff moves so fast. But again, this executive order, not targeted at this, said in there, by the way, de minimis out of China, no, and it really worked. So it'll be very interesting to see where that entire space goes. There's so much movement right now in Congress about de minimis and Type 86 and all of that, and it will be interesting.
I will say this is similar to, for a lot of reasons, this is similar to the debate about the border. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you think that tariffs are a good or a bad idea, no one can disagree reasonably that knowing what packages are coming into the U.S., that Customs and Border Protection needs a little advance notice so they can figure out what's suspicious to inspect, right? If 100%. You get a little bit of advanced data, you can run all sorts of great software heuristics over where you say, okay, we have previously inspected 4 packages from so-and-so exporter in China, and one of them had fake Ozempic or one of them was misdeclared, right? It was pill press parts, but it was described as sofa parts. And every time now, from now on, when we see a package from that shipper, we are going to inspect it, right? Like you can implement actual really good screening that protects Americans. And
correct.
If you're into tariffs, it'll help you enforce tariffs. But we actually need this. Like this situation we're in now where 1.5 million packages arrive at JFK every day and we have no idea what's in them because no one told us in advance. That's not good for any part of American trade policy.
Correct. And the thing about it is exactly as you say, it's not even 1.5 million. The math is actually, it's like 3 million a day. It's an insane amount, whatever it is. It's an insane amount. Customs, they're fantastic people. But there's no chance you can hand inspect 3 million packages, right? There's not even a chance you can X-ray screen 3 million packages a day.
No.
Yes, maybe
you have to be smart about it.
Right. Maybe at one point in time with AI you can, but there's a physical impossibility to moving this much stuff physically through an inspection route. So to your point, you got to get smarter about it, right? And the way you get smarter about it is half the data. And to your point, the advanced data does a variety of things. Not only does it flag, to your point, not only the sender, Customs is really good about this. The region it comes from, the post office it comes from in China, where it was shipped out of, certain weight, size, limitations where there's a lot of targeting factors they can use that allow them to say, ooh, this looks kind of like a duck, looks like a duck, right? You're like, didn't declare as a duck, kind of in the data looks like a duck. I think it's a duck, right? And so you can pull these things out. And absolutely, that's the only way you can detect counterfeit in a flood of 1.3 billion parcels. That's the only way that you will make any. And to your point, in the cargo environment, that is already the requirement for any cargo. Has to be declared 48 hours before it ever gets to port. Airplanes have to have a 48-hour full cargo manifest filed with the U.S. before the airplane ever takes off. So that exists, which is why counterfeiters moved out of that environment into small parcels because it's just easier. Do they still do cargo? Yeah, but it's harder. It's easier to get detected. So
we see a ton of this, and I want to actually bring us back to sort of why we care. I care about inspection and trade policy because I want CBP to be and the other inspectors like from the FDA and DEA who work in these facilities to be able to do the best job possible. And the reason I want that is because I have seen proof of counterfeit airbag parts. I have airbags in my car. They have never gone off. But if they need to go off, I want them to go off and I want them to be the real parts. I have seen endless streams of counterfeit medicines that have made it through these de minimis personal importation shipping processes. I want them to be stopped. Americans are very naive and will inject themselves with things they buy off websites that have a graphic of a Canadian flag, even if the package comes from Turkey.
Right?
Those things are bad for Americans, and I've cried with many families who've told me about the kids that got killed by fake pills, and the parts and ingredients that make those fake pills come in through the small package mail. that has no advanced electronic data. I want that. I want that job to be done better because it's going to distinctly affect my and everyone I love's health.
And just to add on to this, like I come from a different perspective, right? Which is, and that's why you and I think work really well together. I always come from the law enforcement part, right? But I also come from the public safety part here. These counterfeit products, as we said before, fund some really bad guys, like some really, really bad guys. Okay, so I'll give you an example of why this is very personal to me. You remember the USS Cole attack, right? Little dinghy drove up to a US boat, kind of blew a hole into it, right? Okay. That was financed with tobacco smuggling money, which is, I used to be in the tobacco smuggling enforcement world, right? That's what my previous employer. And that little attack on the USS Cole cost $25,000. That was according to a congressional report. That's all it cost, $25,000, maybe 50 if you go highball. 9/11 cost roughly $250,000 to $500,000, estimated by congressional report, for the terror cell that did it at the time to finance the attack of 9/11. I lived in New York on 9/11, so I see what these groups with funding can do, right? And when folks say, oh, counterfeit is not that bad, no, it funds some really, really bad people who don't mean well to us, who don't mean well to the US, who want to either hurt us or hurt Americans. And it's just, for me, it's that. And you're right. If we can do anything that cuts that spigot off to them, that cuts off the financing to them, I'm all for it. So
yeah,
again,
I mean, the cartels in Mexico that have made so much money off fake pills, have continued to use it to intimidate the populace, to kill journalists, to kill politicians, to corrupt politicians, made it hard to have a country with governance that is fair in Mexico. And so, to add to your list of horribles that these things fund, we can add the Mexican cartels, which is pretty awful. Okay.
What's another?
So de minimis, we're going to watch this year. We're going to watch trade policy, and my aspirational goal for our country is that we're going to see advanced electronic data for small packages. And if I have any say in what that looks like, I'm going to contribute my time and effort to that.
Like it. Do you have any other? What's the next story you want to talk about? I know there was something you saw in Europe, right, with some large enforcement.
Oh yeah, so Europol does these great multi-country operations, right? And I don't even want to try and anything I might say to compliment them would be to under-compliment how hard it must be to do a 30-country coordinated law enforcement effort. You've got so many moving parts. You've got to make sure that your investigative efforts at one end don't tip off other people working, at the other end of the criminal conspiracy. This stuff is hard. I say this all the time. The robbers just go out and commit the crime. They don't actually have to put in that much work. It's never as much work as Ocean's 11 caper would be. They just go and do the crime. I remember there was a guy who got out for making fake pills out of jail, went home to Sacramento, rented a storefront, and started doing it again within a couple of weeks. And I was like, wow, he didn't really prep in any way. He just went back to exactly what he was doing. That's what the criminals do. The cops, of course, we have rules, right? They have resource issues. You've got to deconflict with other active investigations because you don't want to end up investigating what turns out to be an undercover operation by another law enforcement agency. There's all sorts of stuff like that just makes it hard to do it. So Europol just coordinated for most of last year, this operation called Operation Shield. And this was number 5. Right? They've done 4 of these before. This coordinated attack on counterfeit medicines and illegal doping products that are used by athletes covered 30 countries. And they had to coordinate law enforcement from 30 countries and international anti-doping authorities, right? So folks that work in and around the Olympics and other professional sports competitions, they had to work with all of them to do it. And by the time this thing was over, and I think it was March to September of last year, they had arrested or charged 418 people. They dismantled 4 underground labs. They'd seized 11 million euros of illegal medicines or ingredients for medicines or machines, 4 million pills and vials and powders. And of course, I think they got like 4 pill presses. And I will just say, my favorite thing about underground pill labs with the pill presses is they often buy orange Home Depot buckets and use them. And you always see those in the raid photos. And there were no orange Home Depot buckets. I don't know if that's because they're not as popular in Europe, but Home Depot, you got to get on the stick, right? You're missing a big market for, criminal pill makers who love your orange buckets in the States. I'm going to guess that the ones in Europe would love them as well.
I probably do. Maybe there's a counterfeiter that wants to do Home Depot buckets, but no. Obviously, bravo. In 2018, I presented at a Europol conference, and you're right, they're beyond impressive. The reports they put out, it's always top level thinking of how will crime move. I remember when I was there, 2018, they talked to me for the first time about, hey, think about criminals or these folks that smuggle. They're not just criminals. That they termed the term at the time, it's Crime Inc. Like they're run like a corporation. They're like, when we take these networks out, they have a CEO, they have a CFO, they have marketing departments, they have different divisions that do different stuff. One might smuggle pills, the other one smuggles humans, this one smuggles medicines, this one does apparel, and really talked about they run like a company, and think of him that way. Don't think of him as, stupid criminals. Think of them that they run this like a highly organized yet highly decentralized, which is what makes them so hard to combat, criminal company, right? Or an Inc. And so that always helped me inform kind of my work, kind of how to think about them as a highly organized yet decentralized kind of organization. And so, yes, what Europol puts together with Operation Shield, Operation Pangea, across, dozens of countries every year is incredible. The one thing that's always, fascinating about this is when you look at these focused efforts, what they do and how much they pull out. But that's the focused efforts that they have, right? So they can't do it 365 days a year, because then you don't do any other crime enforcement. And so for me, it's the shocking piece of 4 million pills just from this effort. Imagine what they would pull out if they do this 365 days a year, right? So it comes back to, we probably need to continuously, as countries, as the US, fund law enforcement more. For brand protection, right? As we talked before, keep up those efforts, work with law enforcement, train your border folks, make sure all this comes in, because the criminals are not going to stop, because there's so much money in it. They have no interest in stopping. They're just going to find something else to counterfeit. And I think for me, and that's the last thing is, and that actually will be one of my upcoming LinkedIn posts, is I think brand owners also need to think more of a collective. And here's where I mean that. If you say, haha, my stuff is not getting counterfeit, but competitor brand's X brand is getting counterfeited, and you're like, I'm cool, mine is not, but his is. No. Still stay in the fight, because if his doesn't get counterfeited anymore, you might be next, right? So all of these need to be joint efforts, because they're just going to go to the one that is large, profitable, and hopefully not as well protected. Or even if it's well protected, if it's really profitable and popular, you'll get counterfeited in a heartbeat. And so everybody kind of staying in there with this community effort. And I know a lot of brand protection directors. I'm friends with a lot of them. We try to work as a hive, but everybody that's there, as Shabir said, join large organizations, find advisors that can help you get to these large organizations, because it needs to be a group effort. It just does. So I'm with you.
I will say that every year I look forward to the results of Europol's Operation Pangea, which is a huge global coordination of this, and what's great is that they're taking information in one country that they learn about a criminal ring and then looking for evidence of it happening in other countries. And that sort of thing is really difficult. Building multi-country investigations is hard, right? It's really, really hard, even for the good guys who have special powers that brand protection professionals don't have. It's very, very difficult. But I love it when Operation Pangea comes out and they publish their results. We always highlight them with a series of social media posts every year. My illustrator makes special graphics, because what Europol possesses in efforts in law enforcement, they don't possess in marketing. So
Yeah.
that's fine. I will help them do marketing. I love them. I love them enough to do that.
So the interesting thing, and just a side comment to what you said before, but as you said it, I was like, I just saw something. So when you said, criminals just need to do their crime and they don't have to follow which laws and how to do it the right way and buy the book and all of that. There was just a hearing in DC. We got the transcript for it. It's about fentanyl scheduling. I don't want to talk about fentanyl scheduling. It's a different thing, but I looked at the transcript, and Sheriff Bouchard out of Michigan was testifying on behalf of the major county sheriffs. And there was one quote in there that I read it this morning when he just said it came up to me. He describes how much harder it got to enforce against crimes in general. And he's talking about, from 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. He's like, because of 9/11, some of the lessons we have, not everybody's communicating. Plus, the moment you have terror involved, it becomes a very different level. And then he says, we don't have real-time ability to even communicate on a secret level. For that, we would have to go into a skiff so we can brief each other on the very secretive things we're working on and all the steps he has to go through. And then the congressman asked him, so it is easier to conduct criminal activities in this country than it is to conduct law enforcement operations. And his answer was just like, absolutely. And that's the rough truth. Like, we talked to DEA agents before, where they said, hey, listen, the cartels, they have us. They're not, do they sometimes outnumber us, but they have out-teched us. They have the newest, brand new tech. She's like, we're running Windows 95 here, right? So, and we have to follow every single law, because if we don't follow it, as we should, but we follow every single law, versus they don't, and just have the appreciation how very hard this is, right? Yeah. And that it doesn't go just as quick, just enforce against this. I wish it was go that easily. And I know law enforcement would, again, which is for the brand owners to know. That's why, work a lot with law enforcement, teach them, show them, educate them, because if you ask them to work on it, it's going to be a hard job, and they got to understand why they're going to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm going to leave with a couple things. Just looking forward to Operation Pangea this year. It's Interpol, not Europol. I misstated that. If you're a brand protection professional, this is the year to pay attention to de minimis packaging and shipping and trade policy. Things are going to change this year, and you actually probably should be contributing, because it's hopefully going to change for the better.
That would be nice.
All right. I don't have a special story I want to cover next week. I'm sure, or in the next episode, we'll find one that we love. If you have ideas, you can go to our LinkedIn page for Imitation Nation and suggest them there, or send us a note. And we'd love to hear about what you've got and what you think we should cover. Anything else, Sven?
Well, you put us on a lot of platforms, right? So people can find us now on various platforms. If they like it, they can just subscribe to it now, right? You put us. I know you're the master brain of all of this. Where did you put us all?
I mean, you can find us on Podbean. You can find us on Spotify. We'll soon be on Apple Podcast. You can find us on YouTube. But I think the best place you should look for us is our LinkedIn page for Imitation Nation. Search for Imitation Nation. You'll find our LinkedIn page. Follow it. And we'll always post the new podcast there. Perfect.
With that, have a wonderful weekend. We're actually going to get a big winter storm here. I just saw we're going to get like 7 to 8 inches or so that'd be fun. But again, in Ohio, it's just we put our big coat on, and that's about it. But we'll have a nice little snow event here.
Awesome. Well, for Sven and I, we'll see you in 2 weeks on the next episode of Imitation Nation. Thank you.
Bye.
The Imitation Nation podcast is a production of Cause Stories and is the sole owner of this production. Podcast production by Elizabeth Rude. Podcast management by Sarah Imbers Haftar. Theme music written by Jonathan Boyle.